The grand hall was a dazzling spectacle of light and color. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above, their soft glow dancing across the polished marble floors. Flowers, meticulously arranged, filled the room with their sweet fragrance. Guests mingled, their laughter and conversation a gentle hum in the background. It was a wedding, one that would go down in history as a perfect affair, or so they thought. The bride, Serena, was radiant in her ivory gown, a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. Her beauty was undeniable, her elegance flawless. The groom, Robert, stood beside her, his tuxedo sharp and pristine. Their union, long awaited and celebrated by family and friends, marked the beginning of what seemed like a perfect future. But as the guests took their seats, ready for the ceremony, to begin, all eyes suddenly turned toward the entrance. A man walked in, his figure tall and commanding. He was a well-known figure, a millionaire in his own right, Ethan Hayes. He was known for his business success, his charisma, and his charm, but today all of that seemed irrelevant, for he wasn't alone. By his side was a woman no one expected, a woman who looked out of place amidst the luxury and splendor of the venue. She was homeless. Her clothes were ragged, her face weathered by the harshness of life on the streets. Her hair, unkempt and tangled, cascaded down her shoulders like a dark waterfall. Her presence seemed almost surreal in the setting, a stark contrast to the polished guests and the gleaming chandeliers. She had the air of someone who had fought for survival at every turn. Her eyes, however, held something deeper, a story perhaps of struggles and survival. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Who was she? Why was she with Ethan Hayes? The questions came in quick succession, but the answers remained just out of reach. Ethan led her through the room with purpose. His eyes scanned the crowd, but his face betrayed nothing. No hint of emotion, no sign of the guilt or hesitation that one might expect from someone who had just brought a homeless woman to his ex-fiancée's wedding. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. The guests couldn't help but stare, their curiosity piqued, their judgment quick to follow. Serena, standing at the altar, froze. Her smile faltered for a moment as her gaze landed on Ethan. And the woman beside him. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained composure. She couldn't let this moment ruin what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But in that split second, she knew something had shifted. Ethan didn't stop to greet anyone as he walked to the front of the room. He didn't acknowledge Serena, nor did he speak to anyone else. Instead, he found a seat, sitting down in the front row, an unspoken declaration that he was here for something, or perhaps someone, more than just a social obligation. The woman beside him stood there silently, her eyes scanning the room as if she didn't quite belong, yet she held herself with a quiet dignity that surprised everyone. No one knew who she was, why she was here, or what had brought her to this place, but they all had one question in common: why her? Serena's heart raced. The woman's presence unsettled her. It wasn't just that she was there. It was a fact that Ethan had brought her. The woman had no place in this world, not in a room full of the elite, the powerful, and the well-dressed. Yet Ethan had chosen to make her the center of attention. But why? What was the connection between them? The priest, noticing the shift in energy in the room, cleared his throat and asked if everyone was ready to proceed. But no one was ready. The eyes of every guest were fixed on Ethan and the woman beside him, waiting for something to happen, an explanation, a revelation. Suddenly, the woman shifted her weight, her hands trembling as she adjusted her ragged shawl. She looked up at Ethan, her gaze intense, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. The noise of the room faded away, and in that instant, all that mattered was the unspoken tension between them. She gave him a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Ethan to stand up. He turned to the crowd, his voice calm, but with a weight that demanded attention. "I know what you're all thinking," he began, his words cutting through the silence. "But this is not just any wedding. This woman," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd, "is someone who changed my life." A hush fell over the room. Serena's breath caught in her throat, her hands gripping the edges of the altar. This was not the wedding she had imagined. This was not the day she had envisioned, the perfect day where all her dreams came true. Ethan continued, his voice steady. "I owe her everything. She is the reason I am who I am today. She taught me the true meaning of survival, of resilience, of fighting for what's right. And today I'm here to make sure she's recognized for what she's done for me. And for so many others." The guests exchanged confused glances, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. No one knew who this woman was. No one knew the story that had just begun to unfold. Serena's mind raced. Who is she? The question echoed in her thoughts, louder than any whisper in the room. But Ethan wasn't finished. He turned to the woman, his expression softening. "I brought her here not because she's homeless," he said, "but because she's the person who showed me that true wealth isn't about money, it's about humanity. It's about the strength to keep going when the world tells you to stop." The woman, still standing beside him, took a deep breath. For a moment she didn't speak, but the weight of her presence in the room was undeniable. She had lived a life that most could never imagine. A life of struggle, hardship, and survival. And today, she was standing in front of a crowd of people who would never understand what it had taken for her to be here. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but clear. "I'm not here for pity. I'm not here for anyone's sympathy. I'm here because I matter, because we all matter, and sometimes the most unexpected people can change your life in the most unexpected ways." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a brief moment, no one moved. The room was filled with silence, the kind that can only come from a deep, shared understanding, or perhaps the realization that this story was far from over. The priest, still unsure of what was happening, cleared his throat again and motioned for the ceremony to proceed, but the damage had been done. The wedding, once so pristine and perfect, had already been shattered by the presence of the woman beside Ethan. Serena felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that Ethan was a man with many secrets, but this was something she hadn't expected. The woman beside him was not just a stranger. She was someone important, someone who had a history with Ethan that no one knew about. And as the ceremony went on, Serena knew she had to find out what it was, and why, of all places, he had chosen this day, this moment, to reveal it. The room was still in a state of stunned silence as the woman's words echoed in the air. Her presence, so unexpected in a place like this, had brought everything to a halt. Ethan had just dropped a bombshell, announcing her importance to his life. And now, Serena stood at the altar, struggling to keep herself composed. Ethan glanced at the woman beside him. She didn't flinch under the weight of the gazes focused on her. Her eyes were calm, almost serene, as if she had anticipated this moment long before it had come to pass. Her presence wasn't one of discomfort, but rather of quiet defiance. She was no longer the ragged, homeless woman who had walked into a room full of millionaires and elite guests. No, she was someone who had survived, who had learned how to thrive in the harshest of environments, and now she was standing in front of a crowd of people who had no idea who she truly was. Serena's thoughts raced. She glanced at the woman. Again, her eyes narrowing. Who was she? There had to be more to the story, something Ethan wasn't telling. The woman's poise, the way she stood with her shoulders back, her eyes scanning the room. It wasn't just the survival of homelessness that had given her this strength. There was a deeper story, one that Ethan hadn't shared yet. The ceremony, which had barely begun, seemed to come to an abrupt halt. No one moved. The guests were either whispering among themselves or simply staring in disbelief. Serena tried to steady herself, but her hands trembled, her mind racing with a mix of confusion and growing unease. "Ethan," Serena said, her voice steady but edged with suspicion, "what is going on? Who is she?" Ethan turned to face Serena, his expression unreadable. His usual charm, the easy confidence that he wore like a second skin, seemed to have evaporated. He seemed to be looking at Serena, but his gaze was distant, as if his mind was somewhere far away, caught in a memory, one he hadn't shared with anyone. The homeless woman whose name no one knew looked at Ethan as if waiting for him to answer. She had her own thoughts, her own story, but now wasn't the time for her to reveal it. Ethan had to be the one to speak. "I know this is unexpected," Ethan began, his voice low but clear, "but there's a reason I've brought her here today." His eyes flicked back to the woman, and for the first time, a hint of emotion crossed his face. Something deep, something vulnerable. The guests exchanged confused glances, but no one dared interrupt. Serena could feel the tension rising in the room, the weight of the unspoken questions hanging in the air. "Her name is Isabella," Ethan continued, breaking the silence, "and she's the reason I'm standing here today." Serena's heart skipped a beat. Isabella! The name rolled off Ethan's tongue with a tenderness that shocked her. There was no mistaking it. There was history between them, a history that hadn't been shared with anyone in this room. Serena felt a surge of jealousy, a cold rush that made her skin prickle. "What do you mean?" Serena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What history?" Ethan paused, his eyes lingering on Isabella. There was something about the way he looked at her that made Serena's stomach twist. She was no longer just a homeless woman. She was a part of Ethan's life, a part of his past, a past Serena had never known about. Before Ethan could respond, Isabella spoke. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as she addressed the room. "I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "I don't want your sympathy or your pity. I'm not here for that. But I'm here because Ethan owes me everything, everything he has, everything he is. It's because of me." The room fell completely silent. Serena's breath caught in her throat. Ethan had owed her everything. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. What had Isabella done to make such a statement? Serena had to know. She felt a chill crawl down her spine, a sensation she couldn't shake. Isabella took a step forward, her eyes scanning the crowd, as if searching for the right words. She wasn't ashamed. If anything, she was proud. Proud of what she had done, proud of what she had endured, and proud of the person she had helped shape Ethan into. But there was something more beneath the surface, something deeper that Serena couldn't quite grasp. Ethan remained silent, his hands clenched at his sides. He wasn't stopping Isabella. Instead, he was allowing her to speak, to tell the story that had remained hidden for so long. "I met Ethan a long time ago," Isabella continued, her gaze never leaving the crowd. "He was nothing more than a boy who didn't know how to survive. He had money, yes, but money didn't make him strong. He wasn't the man you all see now. I met him when he was struggling, when he was lost, and I showed him how to fight." Serena felt a pang of disbelief. Ethan struggling, Ethan, the millionaire businessman, the man who everyone admired? It didn't make sense. But as Isabella's words continued, Serena's doubts began to fade. There was something in the woman's voice, a rawness, an authenticity that made her story feel real, even if it seemed impossible. "I showed him how to survive," Isabella continued. "I was homeless. I had nothing, but I had something he didn't, the will to keep going, the strength to endure. I taught him that no matter how hard life gets, you never give up. You keep moving forward, you keep surviving." Isabella's words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Serena couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had always seen Ethan as the man who had it all. He was wealthy, successful, and powerful. But now, in the shadow of Isabella's words, everything seemed different. Everything felt uncertain. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes locked on Isabella. "She's right," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "She taught me everything. She taught me how to survive when I thought there was no way out. She gave me the tools I needed to build the life I have now." Serena could hardly believe her ears. Ethan, the man she was about to marry, had once been lost, struggling, and dependent on someone else. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he spoke about Isabella, the reverence in his voice, the emotion that seeped through his words. There was something there, something more than just gratitude. There was a connection, something deeper than anyone had realized. The room was still. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone was waiting for the next revelation, the next twist in the story. Isabella's voice softened. "Ethan may have built his empire, but I was the one who taught him that there's more to life than money. That real wealth is in the relationships we build, the people we help, and the lives we change. I've never asked for anything in return. I didn't want his money. I wanted him to understand what it means to truly live." The silence that followed was deafening. Serena stood frozen, her mind reeling. Ethan had changed, but so had she. This wasn't the wedding she had imagined. This wasn't the life she had envisioned. She had been living in a bubble, surrounded by wealth and privilege. But now, reality had shattered that bubble. The man she had known, the man she had loved, was not the man she had thought he was. Isabella wasn't just a homeless woman. She was the one who had shaped Ethan into the man he had become. She was the one who had taught him how to survive. Not just in business, but in life. And now she was here, at this wedding, standing in front of a crowd of people who had no idea what was really going on. Serena's heart raced as she took a step back, her mind spinning. What was Ethan's true relationship with Isabella? What had she really done for him? And why had he brought her here today, on this day of all days? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was certain: the wedding was no longer just a celebration of love. It had become a battleground, a place where secrets, emotions, and truths were about to be revealed. The wedding had come to a standstill. No one knew what to do, what to say. The moment Ethan had brought Isabella into the room had set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The whispers were now replaced with a heavy, suffocating silence that stretched across the grand hall. It felt as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Ethan and Isabella stood side by side, facing the room, while Serena stood near the altar, frozen, her eyes darting between the two of them. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She had never felt so out of place in her entire life. She had always believed she knew Ethan. They had been together for years, their lives intertwined in every way imaginable. But now, with Isabella standing beside him, the man she thought she knew seemed like a stranger. What more was he hiding? Serena's thoughts were interrupted as she heard a soft voice beside her. It was one of the guests, a woman she recognized from the social circles Ethan often traveled in. She leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Serena to hear. "Do you know who she is?" the woman asked, her voice laced with curiosity and disbelief. "I mean, really?" Serena shook her head, her gaze never leaving Ethan and Isabella. "No, but I'm about to find out." Isabella stood with an air of quiet dignity, her eyes fixed on Ethan. She had spoken the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. Ethan had painted her as the person who had saved him, but that wasn't the full picture. She wasn't just someone who had taught him to survive. She was the key to a story that no one, not even Ethan, was prepared to share. The story of how two souls, born in completely different worlds, had come together, intertwined by fate and circumstance. The room was still, the tension palpable, until finally Ethan broke the silence. "I didn't bring her here to cause a scene," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I owe it to her. I owe it to all of you to know the truth." Serena looked at him, her heart aching. She could see the pain in his eyes, the burden of the secrets he had been carrying for so long. But what was the truth? What was Ethan hiding? Isabella turned to the crowd, her face an unreadable mask. She had no intention of telling them everything. Some things were better left unsaid. But Ethan was pushing her. The weight of his past, the shadows that had loomed over him for so long, had finally come to light. It was time for everyone to know the full story, the story that had shaped him into the man he was, the man who had seemingly everything, but at a great cost. You all know Ethan Hayes as the successful businessman, the millionaire who seems to have it all, Isabella began, her voice steady. But what you don't know is that he wasn't always this way. Ethan wasn't always the confident, charming man you see before you. He was broken, lost, and living, on the edge. And I was the one who pulled him back from the brink. Serena's breath hitched in her throat. The way Isabella spoke of Ethan, it was as if she knew him better than anyone ever could. But Serena had always prided herself on knowing Ethan. They had built a life together. They had planned a future. And now it seemed that the man she thought she knew had been living a double life. Isabella took a step forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I first met Ethan when he was a young man, barely out of college. He had a trust fund, but it meant nothing to him. He had everything, but he had nothing. He didn't know what to do with his life, and he certainly didn't know how to deal with the demons from his past." The guests sat in stunned silence. Serena felt her stomach tighten. Demons from his past. "I was living on the streets," Isabella continued, her voice low but clear. "I didn't have a home, a job, or anyone who cared, but Ethan didn't see that. He saw someone who needed help, someone who needed a chance, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just another person on the street. I was someone worth saving." Serena felt a pang of jealousy, a bitterness that she couldn't shake. The way Isabella spoke, the way she held herself, it was as if she had been the one to shape Ethan's character, his very existence, and maybe she had. Ethan shifted, his eyes never leaving Isabella. "She's right," he said softly. "I didn't know who I was. I was lost. I was numb. I had everything on the surface, but nothing underneath. And Isabella gave me that. She gave me a reason to live. She taught me how to survive, not just physically, but emotionally. She made me realize that the wealth I had was nothing compared to the strength of human connection." Serena's heart sank. How could she compete with that? She had always thought her love for Ethan was the thing that kept them together, but now she wasn't so sure. Was it love that had bound them, or something else? A bond created by shared experiences, by survival, by the fight to overcome what the world had thrown at them. As the weight of Ethan's words settled in, Isabella spoke again. "But it wasn't just about saving Ethan," she said. "It was about survival, about realizing that sometimes the strongest bonds are formed out of the deepest struggles. We both learned what it means to fight, to keep going when the odds are stacked against you." Serena couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. She had never been homeless. She had never known what it felt like to fight for survival, to have nothing. She had grown up in a privileged world, surrounded by luxury and security. She had never had to claw her way out of a hole, but Ethan had, and now it seemed that this woman, this Isabella, had been the one to show him how to live. Isabella turned to Ethan, her expression softening. "Ethan didn't just survive," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "He thrived. He became the man you see before you because he had learned the true meaning of resilience. He learned how to survive when everyone told him to quit. And in the process, he changed. He became more than just a man with money. He became a man with purpose. Serena stood frozen, her thoughts swirling. She had always believed that love was the force that could change everything. But now, she was beginning to wonder if that was enough. Ethan's past, his survival, his bond with Isabella, it was a part of him she hadn't known existed, a part of him that had shaped him into the man he was today. But the question still remained. Why had he brought Isabella to the wedding? Why now? What did he expect to happen? And why had he kept this part of his life hidden from her? Ethan turned to face her, his eyes filled with regret. "Serena," he said quietly, "I never wanted you to know this side of me. I never wanted you to see the broken parts, the parts that aren't perfect. I wanted you to see the man I became because of what you and I shared. But I can't keep hiding from who I was. I can't keep pretending that I didn't need Isabella, that I didn't need the lessons she taught me." Serena's heart wrenched in her chest. So, this was it. The man she loved, the man she had built her life around, had always been tied to another, to Isabella, a woman who had shown him how to survive when he didn't even know how to breathe. Isabella stepped forward, her voice calm. "Ethan is a survivor, and he's not the only one. I survived the streets, and I'm here to tell you that no matter where you come from, no matter what you've been through, you can make it. But it takes more than just money. It takes heart. It takes the strength to keep going when the world tells you to stop." The guests were quiet, but Serena's thoughts were anything but. She didn't know what to think anymore. The wedding, the future she had imagined, had been shattered. All that was left was a man who had once been lost, a woman who had shown him the way, and a bride who no longer knew where she fit in. Ethan stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to hers. But Serena recoiled, the sting of betrayal burning in her chest. How could he have kept this from her? How could he have allowed her to believe that their life together was everything? "I didn't want to hurt you," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with pain. "But the truth is, I owe her everything, and I couldn't go on without her being a part of this day." Serena's heart shattered as she looked at him. She had thought she knew everything about him, everything about their life. But now she was faced with a man she barely recognized, and in that moment she realized that she had to make a choice that could change everything. The wedding had dissolved into chaos. What was supposed to be the happiest day of Serena's life had quickly turned into a nightmare, a drama she had never imagined. Ethan's admission of his past, his deep connection to Isabella, had shattered everything. Serena had never been more confused or hurt, and she wasn't sure whether she could stand in the same room as the man who had once been the center of her world. As the guests murmured among themselves, glancing nervously at one another, Serena turned her back to them. The spotlight had shifted from her and Robert, the groom, to Ethan and Isabella, and it felt like the world had tilted, leaving her standing on shaky ground. Ethan had expected this reaction, and yet he was completely unprepared for the fallout. He had known that bringing Isabella here would cause a stir, but he hadn't anticipated the emotional impact it would have on Serena. The hurt he saw in her eyes pierced his soul. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but it was too late to go back now. The truth had come out, and there was no way to undo what had been said. The truth. Ethan didn't even know where to begin when it came to explaining it all. He had lived a lie for so long, a life built on deception, and now it was crumbling before him. Serena was the woman he had always envisioned as his future, but Isabella had been the one who had helped him find the strength to move forward when he was lost. He owed her everything, yet he couldn't seem to bring himself to fully explain why. Isabella stood quietly by his side, her gaze never wavering. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but she didn't let it affect her. She had known that coming here would stir up memories, things that both she and Ethan had tried to bury. But now that the past had resurfaced, there was no going back. "Ethan, I think we need to talk," Serena said, her voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "This isn't right. You can't just bring her here and expect me to understand. You've kept this from me for so long. Why didn't you tell me about her?" Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I didn't want to hurt you, Serena," he said softly, the pain in his voice raw. "I never meant to keep her a secret. I didn't know how to tell you about Isabella. She was part of my life when I was at my lowest, and I didn't want to drag that part of my past into our future." Serena's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "So you thought it was better to hide it from me?" she asked bitterly. "You thought it was better to keep me in the dark about the woman who meant so much to you?" Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but he couldn't deny that part of him had been terrified of losing Serena, the woman who had brought him hope and happiness after the darkness that had plagued him for so long. He had never expected to fall for someone like Serena. She had been the escape, the light after a period of endless pain. But now, standing in front of her, with the truth hanging between them like a sword, he realized that he had made a terrible mistake. "I didn't want to lose you," he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "But I should have trusted you. I should have told you the truth from the beginning." Serena turned away, her hands trembling. She couldn't look at him, not right now. "And what about her?" she asked, her voice low. "What is your relationship with her? Why does she matter so much to you?" Isabella stepped forward then, her eyes meeting Serena's. "I know this is hard to understand," she said gently, "but Ethan and I share a bond that goes beyond what you could imagine. He wasn't the man you know today when I met him. He was lost, broken, and I gave him a reason to keep going. I didn't save him. I just gave him the courage to save himself." Serena turned to her, the anger in her chest rising once more. "You think that makes it okay? That you saved him?" she spat. "Do you think that makes it okay to come into my life and ruin everything we've built?" Isabella didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Serena," she said calmly. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because Ethan wanted you to understand why he is the way he is, why he needed me, and why it's so hard for him to let go of the past." Ethan's gaze flickered between the two women, but he remained silent. There was nothing he could say that would make this situation any better. The damage had been done, and the truth was far messier than he had ever expected. "I know you're angry, Serena," he said after a long pause, "and you have every right to be, but this is who I am, and this is who I've always been. I owe her a debt I can never repay, but I can't keep hiding from the truth. I can't keep pretending that part of my life doesn't matter." Serena was quiet for a long time, the silence between them growing thicker with each passing second. She didn't know what to say, what to think. She had never expected this. She had never thought that the man she loved had such a deep, tangled past, one that she could never have imagined. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at Isabella, really look at her. There was something in the woman's eyes, something fierce, something real. She wasn't the villain in this story. She wasn't trying to take Ethan from her. But the bond between them was undeniable, and Serena couldn't ignore the truth any longer. There was something more between them, something deeper than just a simple friendship. "I never knew this part of you, Ethan," Serena said, her voice trembling. "I never knew you were capable of keeping something like this from me." Ethan's expression softened, regret evident on his face. "I didn't want to hurt you, Serena, but I see now that I have." Isabella stepped back, giving the couple space. "Maybe this is the turning point, Ethan," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time for both of you to face the truth, no matter how hard it is." Serena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her emotions were a whirlwind, a storm she couldn't quite navigate. She had always thought she knew Ethan, thought that their love was strong enough to overcome anything, but now she wasn't sure. "I need some time," Serena said, her voice steady but filled with pain. "I need time to think about everything you've said. About you, about her, about us." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand. Take all the time you need, Serena. I'll be here waiting whenever you're ready." With that, Serena turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the grand hall, his heart aching with the weight of his past and the uncertainty of his future. As Serena made her way outside, the cool evening air hit her face, and for the first time since the ceremony began, she felt a brief moment of clarity. The emotions were still overwhelming, the confusion still clouding her thoughts, but one thing was clear. She couldn't go on like this. She needed answers. She needed closure. She needed to understand the depth of Ethan's connection to Isabella, and whether their relationship could ever survive the scars of the past. But as she stood alone, in the quiet night, with the sound of muffled voices behind her, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to give up on Ethan. Not yet. But she needed to understand the truth. The real truth, before she could ever move forward. The night had descended quietly over the grand venue, casting long shadows across the empty hall. Serena sat alone in her hotel room, her mind spinning with the events that had transpired earlier that day. She could hear the faint hum of the wedding still going on below, the distant chatter of the guests, and the sound of clinking glasses. But inside her mind, there was nothing but silence. Her thoughts were in turmoil. Ethan's confession, the revelation of his connection to Isabella, the way the woman had entered their lives. It had all hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her struggling to find solid ground. She couldn't deny the depth of the bond between them, but she couldn't understand it either. How could she? How could she ever understand a relationship that seemed so entrenched in the past? She took a deep breath, staring out the window, into the dark, her reflection merging with the shadows outside. The silence in the room felt like a physical presence, pressing in on her. Her heart still ached with every thought of Ethan, the man she had loved, the man who had promised her a future. But now, she wasn't sure what that future would look like. She thought back to the wedding, to the moment Ethan had pulled Isabella into the spotlight. She remembered the way Isabella had stood there, calm and confident, her presence somehow commanding. She wasn't just a homeless woman, as Ethan had once described her. She was much more than that. She was a part of his past, a part of his survival. Ethan had owed her his life. But what did that mean for the life they had built together? Serena's phone buzzed on the bed beside her, snapping her out of her reverie. She reached for it, seeing a message from Ethan. "Ethan, Serena, I know you're probably angry, but please, let's talk. I can't go on like this, and I know you're struggling to understand. I'm here whenever you're ready. I want to make this right." She stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. A part of her wanted to respond, to tell him exactly how she was feeling, hurt, confused, betrayed. But another part of her wanted to wait, to let the dust settle before she confronted him again. She wasn't sure what she was even supposed to say. She needed answers, but even more than that, she needed to understand why he had kept this part of his life hidden for so long. With a sigh, she set the phone down and stood up, pacing the room. What now? She remembered the conversation she had overheard earlier, the one that had made her realize how deeply connected Ethan and Isabella were. He owed her everything. Those words echoed in her mind. But what had Isabella really done for him? How much of his past was still holding him captive? The more she thought about it, the more she began to question her own role in Ethan's life. Had she only been a substitute for something he had lost? Had she been the person who filled the void left by Isabella? And if that was the case, what was she really to him? Could their relationship even survive after everything had been revealed? The door to her hotel room opened with a soft click. Serena turned, startled, to see Isabella standing in the doorway. Her expression was calm, composed, but there was an undeniable sense of determination in her posture. "I didn't think you'd come," Serena said, her voice colder than she intended. "What do you want?" Isabella hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. She closed the door behind her with a gentle click, her eyes meeting Serena's. "I know this isn't easy for you," she said, her voice low but steady. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came because Ethan is hurting, and I know that you are too." Serena crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. "Ethan is hurting. What about me? I've spent the last few years thinking I knew everything about him, but now I find out he's been keeping secrets from me, secrets that involve you and him. What am I supposed to do with that?" Isabella's eyes softened and she took a step closer, but not too close. She seemed to respect Serena's space. "I'm not here to compete with you, Serena. I'm not here to take anything from you. But Ethan is a complicated man, and I'm a part of his story, a part of the reason he became who he is today. I know you're angry, and I understand why. But I'm not the villain here." Serena's eyes flashed with frustration. "You're not the villain? Then what am I supposed to call you, the savior? The one who rescued Ethan from his miserable existence? Is that it?" Isabella took a deep breath, her expression never wavering. "No, that's not it at all. Ethan was never a charity case to me, and I wasn't trying to save him. But the truth is, he was a mess. A young man with no direction, no purpose, no idea of who he really was. He was drowning, and I pulled him out of the water. But it wasn't because I wanted to be his savior. It was because he reminded me of myself, someone who had lost everything, someone who had to fight to survive, and we fought together. That's all there is to it." Serena's hands trembled, her anger slowly giving way to something else, something she couldn't quite place. "So, you're telling me that you and Ethan have this bond that I'll never understand, that you have a connection I can't compete with. Is that it?" Isabella's gaze softened even more. "It's not about competition, Serena. It never was. Ethan has always been drawn to you because of your strength, your love. But you have to understand something. When you build a life with someone, it doesn't mean you forget your past. It doesn't mean the people who helped shape you disappear. That's what I am to Ethan. Someone who helped shape him, but you're the woman he chose. You're the one he loves. And I would never try to take that away from you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Serena's heart ached as she realized the complexity of the situation. Ethan wasn't the man she had thought him to be, and maybe she wasn't the woman she thought she was either. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice raw. "I thought we had something special, something no one could break. But now it feels like I'm the outsider in my own life. I don't even know who he is anymore, or who I am to him." Isabella sat down beside her, but she didn't try to touch her. "Serena, love isn't always as simple as we want it to be. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's complicated, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Ethan's love for you is real, and mine for him was real too, but it's different now. It's not about saving him anymore, it's about understanding him." Serena looked up, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "How can I understand him when he's hidden so much from me? How can I ever trust him again?" Isabella's voice softened. "Trust isn't something that comes easily, especially after secrets have been kept. But you have something that no one else has. You have his heart, and that's something I can never take away from you." Serena was silent for a long time, the weight of the conversation sinking in. It wasn't just about Ethan's past anymore. It was about the present, about the woman she had become and the man she had fallen in love with. "Why did you come here?" Serena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come to this wedding?" Isabella took a deep breath. "Because Ethan needed you to understand. He needed to show you that he's not perfect, that he's not just the man you see today. He needed you to know who he really is, even the parts he's ashamed of. But he loves you, Serena, and that's something he can't run away from." As Serena absorbed Isabella's words, something shifted within her. She didn't know if she could fully accept everything that had happened, but she understood now. Understood the depth of the connection between Ethan and Isabella, and the complexity of the man she loved. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Serena felt the burden of the past lighten just a little. She wasn't sure where their relationship would go from here, but she knew one thing for certain. It wasn't over. The morning after the wedding was a cold, grey dawn, the kind of day that reflected the turmoil still brewing inside Serena's chest. The grand venue, now silent and still, had been the site of a whirlwind of emotions. Confusion and raw revelations. Last night had changed everything. Ethan's confession about his past, the unveiling of Isabella's significance in his life, and Serena's struggle to understand what all of this meant for their future had left her with a deep ache in her heart. She had spent the night pacing her hotel room, trying to make sense of it all. Her thoughts had circled endlessly, her emotions bouncing between anger, betrayal, confusion, and sorrow. She knew she had to make a decision, but the weight of it felt unbearable. As the sunlight filtered through the curtains, Serena sat by the window, staring out at the quiet city below. The calmness of the outside world was in stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. How had everything gotten so complicated? Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. "Ethan, Serena, I know I've hurt you. I can't undo the past, but I want to be with you. Please, let's talk. I'm waiting for you. Wherever you are, just come to me and we'll figure this out together." Serena stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had thought about calling him 100 times, but each time she'd stopped herself. The truth was, she didn't know if she could go back to the way things were. She didn't know if she could forgive him for the secrets he had kept, or whether she could ever feel the same way about him after everything had been exposed. The sound of a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood up, her heart racing, not knowing who to expect. As she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing in front of her, was Ethan. His face was tired, drawn, and there was an unmistakable look of regret in his eyes. "I couldn't wait any longer," Ethan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to see you. I need you to hear me out, Serena. Please." Serena stepped aside, allowing him into the room. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she didn't know if it was from anger or something else, something softer, something that still held on to the memories of the man she had once loved. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say," she said, her voice trembling as she crossed her arms over her chest. "You've said it all. You've told me everything, Ethan, and now I'm left trying to figure out what to do with all of it." Ethan looked at her, his gaze filled with pain. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice raw, "but I need you to understand something. Everything I've done, everything I've built, it's all been because of what I learned from you and from Isabella. But it was never about the two of you fighting for me. It was about me learning how to love, how to be a man who could stand by your side, not just be someone you had to carry. But I failed you, and for that I'm sorry." Serena's breath hitched in her throat. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream at him for everything he had kept from her, for all the years of lies, but there was a part of her that still ached for him. For the man he had been, for the man he was, and for the future they had once dreamed of together. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," Serena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I did before. You kept things from me, Ethan, important things, things that could have changed everything." Ethan's eyes welled up with unshed tears, and he took a step closer to her. "I know, and I can't change what's already been done, but I can promise you this: I love you, and I'm not going to give up on us. I know I've hurt you, but I believe we can work through this if you're willing to try. Please, Serena, don't walk away from me." Serena closed her eyes, the weight of his words crashing down on her. She didn't want to give up on him. But could she really move forward after everything? Could she forgive him for the secrets he had kept, for the parts of his past that he had hidden away? As she opened her eyes, she looked into Ethan's pleading gaze. She had spent so much time in the past few days questioning everything, trying to understand who Ethan really was. And yet, even after all the confusion, all the pain, she realized something important. Love wasn't just about the past. It was about what came after, what came next. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan," Serena said, her voice wavering, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can make this work, if you're willing to put in the effort. I need to see that you're really ready to change, to be the man I need you to be. And I need time to heal. We can't just pick up where we left off. Things aren't that simple." Ethan nodded, his face filled with relief. "I'll do whatever it takes, Serena. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'm not asking for everything, to be okay right away. I'm asking for a chance to make things right." For a moment, the room was still, the silence pressing down on them both. Serena's heart was still conflicted, torn between the man she loved and the man who had betrayed her trust. But in that silence, she realized that the hardest part of this was not whether she could forgive him. It was whether she could forgive herself for letting him into her heart after all the damage had been done. "I don't know what the future holds for us," Serena said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm willing to try. For now, let's just take it one step at a time." Ethan stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. This time, Serena didn't pull away. She allowed him to hold her hand, a silent promise between them, acknowledging that their path forward would be uncertain, but still possible. "I'll take whatever time you need," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I just need you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed were filled with small steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. Serena and Ethan began to talk, really talk, about their feelings, their fears, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of understanding, moments when Serena saw glimpses of the man Ethan had become. The man he was trying to be. Isabella, too, remained a part of their lives, though not in the way she once had been. She had stepped back, allowing Serena and Ethan the space they needed to heal. And while her presence was still a reminder of the past, Serena began to see her not as a threat, but as a catalyst for Ethan's growth. It wasn't perfect. The scars of the past didn't disappear overnight. But with time, trust was rebuilt. Love was rediscovered. And though their future remained uncertain, they both knew that they were willing to face it together, whatever it might bring. The lesson: Serena learned something important through this journey. Life wasn't always about the idealized version of love. Sometimes it was about confronting the harsh realities of who we are, accepting the mistakes we've made, and finding the strength to move forward. Love wasn't always easy. It wasn't always simple, but it was worth fighting for if both people were willing to try. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Serena and Ethan moved forward, one step at a time. The future wasn't guaranteed, but they had each other, and that was enough. The end.